Great. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. And thank you to our NEMA conference sponsor, Crystallization System, Inc., whose ad we just showed. My name is Scarlett Hoey. I'm the Manager of Membership and Development here at NEMA. Thank you for joining us for Creative Revenue Streams Amidst the Pandemic. I'm going to go ahead and share our screen again. So virtual spaces cannot replace the lands that sustain and empower us. I'd like to show my respect and acknowledge that I am in Worcester, Massachusetts, homelands of the Nipmuc Nation people, past and present. The Nipmuc Nation Tribal Council is located at 25 Main Street, South Grafton, Massachusetts. The Hassanamisco Indian Museum is at 80 Brigham Hill Road in Grafton, Massachusetts. While virtual spaces cannot, as we all know, this COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted some of the typical revenue streams at museums. Museums previously utilized a range of events and activities for diversified revenue streams, starting with admissions and possibly including facility rentals, galas, summer camps, tours, and much more. And the thing that all of these activities have in common is that they all involve many people gathered closely together. And that's the very thing that a pandemic no longer allows. Museum workers have had to quickly revamp their programs to continue to provide content to patrons and, where appropriate, monetize their offerings to support their museum's mission and its financial stability. This session will look at how organizations have been creative with their revenue streams. I'll give a brief overview of what I've heard from our NEMA members during meetups this past summer. And then Patrick McNamara and Cara Sutherland will go more in depth about what they did at their institutions. We'll have time for a Q&A at the end of the session. Please utilize the Whova chat and the Q&A feature. Looking forward, what did we learn? How do these programs exist in 2021? And do some programs continue beyond? So over the last 6 months, museums have grown their digital footprint with many museum at-home programs, from the Boston Children's Museum's Big Little podcast to the Fairbanks Museum and Planetarium in Vermont offering Girl Scout YouTube videos, to even zoos getting involved with the platform Cameo. The famous Cincinnati Zoo hippo Fiona is bringing in $100 per video clip. And while video and audio are great for museum engagement, museums have also stepped into the mask market. The Tamaquag Museum, the Mark Twain House, and the Museum of Bad Art can all be seen here on the screen. And of course, who can forget Tim #the Cowboy at the National Cowboy Museum. I'm glad to see they're capitalizing on their social media star with this t-shirt. Admissions to some galleries have been replaced with free virtual tours. Here are two that I've enjoyed recently: Becoming Vanderbilt at the Rosecliff Museum Preservation Society of Newport, and the Slater Memorial Museum at Norwich, Connecticut. Providing access certainly fits museums' missions, but does the effort translate into revenue? How many people that view the virtual tour go on to donate or visit in person when safe? If anyone has any insights, we can discuss this at the end in the Q&A or make a comment in the chat. An earlier session today, Fresh Ideas for Futurist Fundraisers, had some great ideas around virtual fundraisers, and I encourage everyone to watch the video when it's available post-conference. But aside from virtual galas and auctions, here are two museum fundraising events that got donors giving while ensuring safety away from large crowds. The first is the Maine Cassine Historical Society. They planned mystery backyard picnics, which encouraged donors to make a gift, packing picnics using local food vendors, and the museum would connect them to a secret donor spot with a beautiful overview. Both the Brickstore Museum and the Seacoast Science Center shifted their races, typically large in-person events, to virtual 5Ks, encouraging participation, social distancing, and donations. If your site has a similar story, please share it in the chat. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Patrick McNamara, Functions Manager at Historic New England, to discuss micro weddings. All right, take it away, Patrick.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Scarlett, and thank you to you and the team at NEMA for inviting me to give this presentation today. and Cara, it's a pleasure to be presenting along with you.
Thank you.
It was back in March when I received a magazine article from a friend over in the UK, former classmate of mine, and it was talking about mini monies, like mini ceremonies. And it was kind of one of those, is it here to stay or not kind of thing. And that got me to thinking, because we didn't know what was going to be happening here. We had no idea there were going to be lockdowns, there were going to be minimum numbers and maximums and all that kind of fun stuff. So I came up with this idea for our function and event venues, of which there are 11 out of our 37 properties around New England. Let's promote micro weddings, where it's a 2-hour time period and it is ceremony and photos outside on the properties. And so our Crackerjack marketing and PR team got things in line, and we started promoting it in May. And the largest number of properties we have that can host events are in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts, as I recall, had this June 28 parameter where you couldn't do anything before then or something. I don't know, it's all a blur now. Our first micro wedding was on July 11. And we were kind of crystal balling it like, okay, we can probably book 10 of these at our properties. And we ended up booking, hold on. Scarlett, can you, Scarlett, can you go back?
Yeah.
And post my second one?
Yep.
We ended up booking 38 from Maine to Rhode Island. And on the left is the grounds of our Hamilton house in South Berwick, Maine. And on the right is our Casey farm in Saunderstown, Rhode Island, just outside of Newport. And next slide, please. And from New Hampshire to Connecticut. And on the left is the Governor Langdon House and Gardens in Portsmouth. And on the right is Roseland Cottage in Woodstock, Connecticut. And that was our first micro ceremony on July 11. And next slide, please. On the left is the summer house at the Lyman Estate in Waltham, Massachusetts. On the right is the Italian garden at the Codman Estate in Lincoln, Massachusetts. Next slide, please. On the left is the Eustis Estate in Milton, Massachusetts. And on the right is Beauport, the Sleeper McCann House in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And the bulk of our weddings, micro weddings, we ended up with 12 at the Eustis Estate, because if you can go one more slide forward. Yeah, that's fine. Because we ended up getting really great press out of Boston Magazine, which caught on to our micro weddings along with some other properties. And I'll be talking about that in 1 second, but the micro weddings have produced over $18,000 in revenue with limited cost to us. When I say limited cost to us is because I designed them specifically so that no catering was involved and they could be overseen by anyone on staff, meaning you didn't have to be an event expert or a catering manager or anything of that sort. We promoted them as being DIY and without any catering management, but there would be someone on staff for an emergency. And so the weddings were all outside, and we had a dedicated restroom for them inside the each mansion. But 3 of our future weddings booked their micro weddings at half price, meaning that they have a larger wedding schedules in the future, but they wanted to have a micro wedding on their first scheduled wedding date. And I'll show you more about that in a minute. And we're able to host 2 micro weddings at the full rate of $495 that had canceled, meaning they had canceled their full event, but we're still able to salvage 2 of them. The bulk of our weddings at Historic New England have postponed to next year or 2022. And we had a few that did cancel outright. And you get to know these clients. And unfortunately, they canceled because they lost their jobs, either the bride or the groom or both of them. So yeah, it's pretty bad. But they were thrilled they could still host a micro wedding at the $495 rate. And I came up with that rate because my background is in historic hotels, and $495 sounds so much better to the public than $500. So anyway, so that was really great. Okay, next one. Thanks. Next screen, yeah. So here we are with Boston Magazine. They honed in on the Eustis Estate as one of its quote unquote 8 New England venues for a perfectly petite micro wedding. The wedding on the left called me because they read about it, and the wedding on the right heard about it from a friend who read it in Boston Magazine. So when I talk about it's $18,000 in revenue, that means that that's the black and white of it. But you know what? All of these brides and grooms post their photos online. They get talked about. Photographers also post their weddings online, but half of the weddings had a professional photographer. And a couple of the micro weddings found out about us from seeing photographers' photos online. So that worked out great. All right, next screen, please. Yeah. This is actually pretty funny. The bride and groom for this particular micro wedding had a really great sense of humor. Their something blue for their wedding were the masks that were handed out to all of their guests. So they had a great sense of humor, and they had a really beautiful ceremony. I wrote that intimate weddings may be here to stay for the foreseeable future. It's funny, you know, timing is everything. In the past couple of months, we've been receiving a lot of requests for like 50 people or so. But the last couple of days, I've been receiving a lot of calls for the 100 plus. And I think that's because of the news with the 2 companies that are producing vaccinations, and people are starting to feel good about that now. So it's been a little bit tough, but I still think that people are going to have more intimate weddings than larger ones for next year. And next slide, please. This is a Eustis Estate wedding. Down the bottom, the bride said, "Thank you for making this come true. I can't believe I'm a Eustis Estate bride." This bride, a real stalwart bride, she had booked for May of 2020, a big tented wedding. She then postponed it to Labor Day weekend of 2020. And who knew at that time, right? And then she said, "I've got to do something different now, Patrick." And so she booked for August of 2021. But what she said to me was, "We want to do that, but we're hoping to have some sort of celebration beforehand." And I said, "Well, Stephanie, why don't you think about having a micro wedding? I can do it at half price, and we'll have it on the August 14th of this year on a Friday." So they did, and this is her picture. This was after she had cried and reapplied her makeup, but at the Eustis Estate, and she was so grateful. And we are now offering a winter micro wedding special that has debuted at the Lyman and Eustis Estates, valid basically November 15 through April 15. And we've already received one booking from it, and 10 people maximum inside the building. And next. So here we are, and this shows you, these were 2 micro weddings that took place this month. The one on the left is at the Lyman Estate in the beautiful Samuel McIntyre designed masterpiece, and 1793. And as you can see, that is set up for 10 people maximum. And the one on the right was 7 people at the Eustis Estate, and that was from this past Friday. But that shows you what we'll be doing in the wintertime. And again, a maximum of 10 people with a dedicated restroom, and you don't have to have a catering manager or an event planner on staff to do it. And you just need to have someone there to for an emergency. And you know, we do send contracts to all of our micro weddings like we do with our regular weddings. And we have stipulations in there, you know, the no open flame, no confetti, you can't wrap things around columns, all of that. So if you are thinking of getting into it, and we welcome competition, you want to have those stipulations in line. And I've had a couple of micro weddings say, can we book for next May and June? And right now I'm saying no. So we're optimistic. That's what we're all about at Historic New England. Optimistic that we'll get back to our regular weddings, but we don't have that crystal ball set up yet. We're looking at that in January. So anyway, that's our micro weddings at the Historic New England and our 11 different properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And we'll be doing Q&A at the end, so I know there's a few questions for you as well.
Great. Terrific. On to you, Cara.
Thank you. All right. If you haven't looked us on the map, we are at the foothills of the White Mountains. So this is just a typical sunset in December, right before Christmas of last year. And for us in December, we are getting ready to slow down operations for the winter. Once the snow comes and the cold comes, we really don't have people on the property, and the staff kind of takes the opportunity to get things done that got put off during the bulk of the summertime. But also in December of last year, we were aware of COVID. Part of our mission is to interpret medical history because our founder was the local country doctor. So we have an awareness of the medical things going on. So we had heard about COVID in December, but really wasn't paying much mind to it at the time. Next slide, please. So on January 1st of this year, we are, and we still are, a historic site with 500 plus acres, multiple buildings, focused on reinterpreting rural life in the medical practice. 6 generations of the Remick family had been on this property from the late 18th century till when Doc Remick died in 1993. Because we also are a farm, we practice sustainable agriculture and provide product to the local community. And we're also part of the tourism economy here in the foothills of the White Mountains. Tamworth is a small village, and this is what it looks like in the winter here. It's very pretty, it's snowy. January and February for us last year, this year, it seems like a million years away at this time, but we're getting ready for our big ice harvest, which is the first of the big special events that we do a year. Normally we would do about 8 different special events throughout the year. It brings a lot of people onto the property. They get to experience an aspect of rural life. And normally these events bring in a lot of people from urban areas. 2 hours away for a day trip is not a big deal for many people. Next slide. So in early March, for us here on the farm and museum, we're still not seeing a lot of visitors on a day-to-day basis, but it's lambing season and it's maple season. So, you know, we've had January, February relatively quiet, but now starting to gear up with the operations. Next slide. But then we have to determine, are we essential? Because March is when it hits. March 2nd is when COVID technically arrived in New Hampshire, the first case being over at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, a medical student. March 13th, Friday the 13th, Governor Sununu declares a state of emergency. At that point, we're all starting to go, what are we going to be doing? By 2 days later, he declares that all the public schools need to close. And on March 26th, all non-essential businesses are ordered to close. Now, that's fine if you're a museum and if you can just turn off the lights and go home. But our four-legged staff are here 24/7. So there's a good part of what we do on a daily basis that is considered essential. Next slide. So in March, we shut down. All of the buildings and the grounds are closed to the public for the stay-at-home order. And we start to look at our work plan for essential employees. The farm team is essential, but also other staff take on essential duties as well. One of the things I did, not knowing if we were going to have problems with people commuting to work, is I provided everyone with a letter that outlined how they function in terms of essential duties under the farm and food production guidelines with the state of New Hampshire. And this is something that they could keep in their car, because we did not know if state police or the sheriff would be pulling people over on the road saying, hey, you're supposed to be at home. What are you doing out? So this was a very quick pivot. This happened within days of March 13th. Next slide. So we're in scramble mode, but still doing the things we have to do on a daily basis to take care of the animals, and starting to get a sense of what the community is going to need from us. We see early mid-March, we're suspecting there's going to be supply chain disruption. So this is impacting product availability in grocery stores. In an urban setting, it's not such a big deal because you have multiple opportunities and venues for your shopping. Here in rural New Hampshire, for me personally, it's a 20-30 minute drive just to go to a real grocery store. So that's an issue. People are starting to fear traveling far from home. They don't want to be caught out there. The stay-at-home order promotes self-sufficiency. Okay, we've got to take care of ourselves. You can't just assume you're going to go to the grocery store. What are we going to do? The community starts to step up to take care of each other. One of the things about Tamworth and this part of New Hampshire is we have a very large at-risk elderly population. And one of the communication methods we have is something called the Tamworth Exchange and the Sandwich Board, which are Google groups that each have a couple thousand people who subscribe to that. And you can put out that you need somebody to run an errand, and the visiting nurses helped coordinate that. So it really started to be a sense of neighbor taking care of neighbor, and we come more 19th century in our outlook. I would say in the first couple of months, I would travel from home to the museum, so maybe never going beyond 15-mile radius for about 3 months. So we become very insular, but people are watching out and taking care of each other. Next slide. What happened to us is we've always had a small meat sales part of our plan. Our program involves foodways. We do hearthside dinner cooking. We do cooking demonstrations. With school groups, we do cooking. We had always been providing people with the opportunities to purchase pasture-raised meat and eggs here at the museum, but it was on a relatively small scale. What happens with the various problems and challenges with supply chain and people not wanting to go out is they look to us as a source of food. Also, once the weather starts getting better, we're a safe place to go walk. We have walking trails on the property, And even though the buildings are all closed, there's no restrooms, and the pasture areas immediate to the barns are all roped off. We're not letting people near our animals because we don't know what's happening. At least we give people the opportunity to get out and get some fresh air. Also, we go in the big pivot to online programming. We create videos, virtual tours. It becomes an opportunity for us to explore both agricultural literacy and medical history interpretation on a scale we hadn't done before. And we're not charging for any of the online programming, and we're not charging for the walking trails. Next slide. So this is what we produce. As I mentioned, we're a large property. Sustainable agriculture is something we're interested in. Our founder, who left his estate to us, Dr. Remick, in addition to being a country doctor, trained at Tufts Medical School, he raised racehorses and Holstein cows. His farm was called Hillsdale, and we use that today too to register our Holsteins. Next slide. Remick eggs are something people want. And to date, we've sold probably about 1,200 dozen eggs so far this year. All of our animals are pasture raised and free ranging. And the chickens are in enclosures, but sometimes they get out and go walk about in the gardens. So eggs are something that people have come to rely on for us. And also, as I mentioned, they're free range, and what feed they get is soy free. So that's also something people are interested in from a health perspective. Next slide. Meat. Pork, beef, chicken, and lamb are something that we always raise for in-house use. And we had started doing more and more availability. In 2019, we did our first meat CSA program. It was a small-scale program, just limited to summer months, that provided people with the opportunity to get cuts of meat. And we referred to these as grillers packages. What we do with raising animals for meat production is it's a twofold thing. We want to help people understand where food comes from. Something I noticed when I first came here nearly 5 years ago, when you would talk to visitors, is they were surprised to see animals, and were having a hard time understanding at terms that that big pig is where your bacon and your pork chops come from. And even when we do school to farm days, children really are not connected with food production. So that part of what we can do by showing them our animals, we talk about heritage breeds and how animals are raised, how they're cared for, is helping that connection back. Meat does not just come in a plastic package in the grocery store. This is where it comes from. Next slide. Hay. Not only do we help feed humans, we help feed the animals in our area. We have an extensive hay field plan. We grow all of our own hay for our own animals, but we also sell a certain amount of hay each year to other farms. A lot of people with small animals, a couple of horses, they'll come buy hay from us. And this summer, 2 challenges have happened for us. One, with the border shut down with Quebec, people who were normally getting truckloads of hay out of Canada have not been able to access hay. So that's put an increased demand on hay that's coming out of New Hampshire and Vermont. Second is the drought. Because of the drought this summer, our hay production is significantly down, to the point where we had to turn away people that we had promised hay for, just because we needed to have enough stockpiled for our own animals here. So it's a balancing act. You can't predict what nature is going to do. Each year we say we want a heavy snowpack because that's poor man's fertilizer. That's snow. And last year in 2018-19, lower snowpack, same again this past year. So as a result, now we're in a drought situation. Next slide. Maple syrup is something that we produce with the maple trees that we tap on property. We tap about 250 trees during the month of March. You know, and for us, maple is a sign of hope in spring, because until the days get warm, the sap won't run. So maple season is something we look forward to. A challenge for us this year is the statewide maple weekends were canceled. And normally on the state maple weekend, we will welcome, in 2019, we had over 1,200 people through our sugar house over the course of 2 days. This year, we could not allow anyone access to our sugar house. As a result, our maple syrup sales are down for the year as compared to where we thought they would be in the budget. However, it's shelf stable, so it's not going to go bad. Next slide. Something new that we took this year as an opportunity, and this has only been since the end of summer, is a dairy program. We have a small dairy herd now, and the cows produce more milk than the calves need. Prior to the end of the summer, we were just feeding the excess milk to the pigs, who enjoy it, but then you're still dumping out a lot of milk from what was being produced. We have Holsteins that we're milking Jerseys, we're milking Guernseys, we're milking Brown Swiss. And people are like, don't you just keep the calves with the moms? We do that with the beef herd. The Herefords are very good moms and take very good care of the calves. With the dairy cows, it's sometimes hit or miss. I've watched a Jersey give birth, look at the calf and walk away. Just no interest whatsoever. And leaves it to somebody else in the herd to clean up the calf. Also with our calves, our dairy calves, we take them after 24 hours, and this way we can monitor their health rather than letting them run wild in the pasture. We're making sure they're getting the nutrients they need. That first couple of days, we're milking their moms to make sure the cholesterol. And also we need to socialize them. We have a dairy 4-H program. So you want these calves to be used to being around people, because the children will be working with them to get them ready to show in the summer. Normally we would show with the 4-H team about 5 or 6 different fairs we would travel to throughout New England, including the Big E. This year the kids stayed home, and it's been disappointing, especially for one young lady who is in her senior year of high school, that wasn't able to show her last summer. But this is one of our Jerseys. They're sloppy, but they're awful cute. So on July 1, we're allowed to reopen to the public. We weren't quite sure exactly how we were going to do this. We made the decision early on that we were going to close the buildings and not allow anyone in the buildings, the historic house, the barns, the main museum that has exhibition space. We weren't allowing them in the gift shop. There would be no restrooms on property. And we make this very clear to people with signage and on the website. But we also decided, because we are limiting the experience, that admission would be pay as you wish by donation. We would not charge admission. We made this decision based on the fact that our personnel expenses were down. We had a few people resign in January and February. We chose not to replace them. So as such, we could get by without charging admission to the general public. Plus, we weren't too sure what was going to be happening. Here in Tamworth, the Lyceum Cafe decided not to open for the summer. The Barnstormer Summer Stock Theater did not open for the summer. And realistically, during July and August, it felt like a ghost town here. So most of our visitors during the summer were local folk, or people who had come up and stayed. It was not a huge tourist influx of people going to the White Mountains. And what we did is just on a daily basis, open to the public, 10 to 2, free to walk the ground, interact with staff, just don't get too close. During July, we took our gardens. We do 3 kitchen gardens representing 3 different generations on the property, and decided to use the produce from those gardens as a staff vegetable CSA to help feed the staff. And our gardener, Shannon, also worked on writing her notes from the garden every week called tendrils. And we sent those out in email, but also posted on our website and on our Facebook. During this year, we have gone heavily into social media and no paid advertising to speak of whatsoever, which was another major savings for us. August is New Hampshire Eats Local Month, so that works when you're providing curbside pickup service for meat and eggs and maple. Also by August we've got the challenge, we've had to put limits on what people can buy. Earlier in the summer, well, actually by May, we had pretty much met our target goal in income with meat and egg sales for the entire year because people were depending on us so heavily. So we had to set limits and just explain to people this is how it goes. It was also another educational experience because we could say, you know, for planning for meat, we have to plan 2 years out. It takes 2 years to raise a steer from calf to a full-size animal that we can use for meat. A pig, it takes about 7 or 8 months. Chickens, about 2.5, 3 months. So it's not something we can say, oh yeah, sure, we'll just go to the butcher and get another animal. That doesn't work that way. Also, the challenge is we only use USDA, FDA in terms of product packaging. And in New Hampshire, there are only 4 butchers in the state that are USDA butchers. And there's the same challenge in Vermont and in Maine, and that if you're trying to raise animals, you know, we're not certified organic, but we could definitely get our certified humane. There's just no place to get them taken care of. Our farm manager books her butchering appointments 12 to 18 months in advance. And then we're on everybody's wait list and cancellation list in case they have an opening. Next slide. In September and October, what we decided to do, given that it was certain uncertainty about what was going to be happening with school populations, is we would limit public access to Thursdays through Sundays, and that was based on attendance patterns we saw in the summer, and leave Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays open for outdoor learning homeschool pod sessions. We're hearing from a lot of parents and caregivers that they were choosing to homeschool and they didn't even know where to begin. They were not traditional homeschoolers, and we made this available to them at a very, very low fee, you know, $20. You can come, you can be on property for an hour and a half, 90 minutes. You get a lesson with our program manager, and it's based on whatever is happening, nature and environment during that week. What happened is the people who came on the first Monday then signed up for every Monday for the next 2 months. So that after the first week of doing homeschool pod learning, we were completely booked for the entire fall season. Next slide. In November, again, we're continuing the Thursday through Sunday, but now visitation has pretty much disappeared. It's cold and there is snow. We still have the COVID guidelines that we're asking people to follow. The space is wide open. We do see people walking on the property, and we will continue to offer that. This winter, though, we won't be plowing as extensively as we have in the past. Just, it's part of a security issue that we don't want to really encourage people being on the property if staff aren't here, because at this point, we don't know if we're going into another shutdown. We're already starting to plan that the staff who works in the main buildings, we're going to have to stagger our schedules starting next week so that the people who have offices on the 3rd floor aren't there all at the same time. And we're just going to do it a week at a time at this point because we don't know what's going to happen. Next slide. So where do we go from here? We're going to continue focusing on food production for humans and animals. We're going to continue providing support for parents and caregivers who are undertaking homeschool. We've already realized and accepted that we're expecting 2021 to look a lot like 2020 in terms of our visitor access. And we're choosing to treat this disruption as an opportunity to rethink our interpretive message and focus on the future. Historically, we were really looking at this property and talking about 19th century New England. And now we're using this as an opportunity to talk about, well, food and health and community. And if Doc Remick were here, how would he be responding to an epidemic? And what is it about herd immunity? And we can talk about herd immunity because that's what we have on our property with our animals. And look at the past and the present in order to help try to figure out the future. So that's what we're looking at. It could be subject to change. That beautiful nose there is Holly, who is one of our brown Swifts. And she's a big girl, but she thinks she's the size of a puppy and would crawl in your lap given the chance. Next slide. And I mentioned our Holsteins. That's Pippa. And Pippa is the first registered Holstein born on this property in about 50 years. She was born this spring. And she's a pretty girl, but she's a little wild, as you can see by her eyes, and she does get into trouble. So thank you.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing your site stories. We have a few questions, so I'm just going to read them to you. We have one for Patrick. Did the wedding party provide any food or drink? And did you charge the same amount for inside or outside?
It's a stipulation that we don't allow any food or alcohol because everything at our properties has to be catered. So that took care of that. And also it's stipulated that they have to follow all COVID guidelines, and we have those posted at all of our properties also. The weddings were all outside. So, for example, if we had a wedding up at the Hamilton House or Governor Langdon House in Hamilton House is in Maine, Governor Langdon in New Hampshire, and there's no interior access. So if it happened to be inclement weather, bring umbrellas. Yep. And they had to bring their own chairs too. Like I said, it was DIY.
Thank you. And then this is not a revenue specific question, but someone was curious how many folks have added a COVID waiver for guests to sign. So Cara, did you do anything like that with your program?
We did not, but with the pod programming, what the parent or caregiver has to do is organize their own group. Prior to this, we would have had homeschool days where people could just sign up and you'd have a mixed group. With this fall programming, they had to come as their own contained group. Now that meant they could partner with another group. We had an example of a mom in Concord coming with her 2 kids and meeting her friend with their 2 kids. So they got together as a group, but they had organized it themselves. We have the very specific guidelines that the state of New Hampshire required us to post. They're posted in our parking lot. So before you even get to the property, you've hopefully seen and read them. Also, they're posted on our property as well.
Great, thanks, Cara. And then Patrick, did you have any waiver forms, I guess?
Any what?
The waiver forms for your weddings?
Well, they had to sign off on the contract and everything's included in that contract, including a separate list of do's and don'ts. You know, knock on wood, everyone followed it. So it was great. But as far as the winter weddings at our properties at the Lyman and Eustis Estates for up to 10 people, we will be getting everyone's emails and phone numbers for contact tracing. So yeah, and those weddings, by the way, are aware that who knows if the governor declares something like no gatherings, then it's off. But we're keeping our fingers crossed. And like I said, we have 1 booking so far and it just came out. So yeah.
That's great. And then there's one more question for you, Patrick, which was, is there a pay difference between the winter and fall weddings?
Yes. So the summer and fall weddings were $495 and the winter weddings are $695. So for under $700, you can have your wedding at a beautiful property. But anyway, the reason that the increase is because, you know, we have to pay for things like heat and electricity and plowing and the whole bit. So shoveling, so to cover that. If they want it, they'll pay it. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. We had about 70 folks, and if there's no more questions, oh, we have 2 more questions that just got asked. Look at that. Patrick, for the half-price deal for those who booked a full wedding for later, how do you make sure they keep that full wedding date later?
It's a good question. I mean, you know, right now, all 3 of them are still on for their future weddings, but it's one of those kind of handshake things and say, okay, you know, we plan to see you next August. So there's no guarantee.
Great. And one more, why not continue micro weddings after COVID, even once large weddings resume?
Because our revenue kind of goes up, but we're playing that by ear. We'll take a look at that in March, probably. Yeah. But thanks for asking. Thank you for asking. And like I said, we welcome the competition. So if anyone wants to get in it, great.
Perfect. Well, oh, one more question for Cara. Have you all thought of selling maple syrup for delivery? I would love some here in Worcester.
Well, we are working. You can actually call the museum and we'll ship it to you. One of the things that we did 2 summers ago now, because I have to renew the license, is we got an FDA canning license because we started doing a Remick pantry line of jams and jellies and preserves using things grown on the property. And having an FDA license for those items will allow us to sell and ship across state line. Maple syrup, we can already do that. And our maple syrup, you know, we got a highest rating kind of guarantee this year from the maple syrup producers of New Hampshire. Right now, our sales have to be through the phone lines. We don't have our website set up yet for online shopping, but you can call us and we will be more than happy to ship the maple syrup.
That sounds perfect for Thanksgiving breakfasts just here at home.
Well, one of my projects for next week, if I can get it done and get the other things off my plate, is we do a maple bacon jam that we make for Maple Weekend, which is amazing. Just spread on toast and then you put eggs on top of it, or as a grilled cheese sandwich with cheddar cheese, or just a meatloaf, or just eat it out of the jar, because I had one guy the first year we did it just buy 2 jars. I'm like, really? He's like, well, I need one to eat on the way home and the other one is for the refrigerator.
That sounds delicious.
But it's helping people again understand how things are grown. You know, I think I was surprised when one day I was in the children's garden and these kids did not understand that tomatoes grew on plants. So it's really, you know, putting this connection back of where does food come from? And if you understand that, then maybe you'll have a little more sympathy for the environment and what we're doing to it and how we have to manage the land as well.
Definitely. Well, and that reminds me of Sarah's keynote a little bit this morning as well. So everybody in the chat is saying they want the jam and they're very excited. And if there's no further questions, I'm going to refresh this one more time. I really appreciate you both taking the time to talk to us today. And I hope you have a great rest of the NEMA conference. And thank you so much for being here.
Hey,
thank
Scarlett,
you, everybody.
I have a question. Scarlett,
Yeah.
I have a question for Cara.
Yes.
Hey, Cara, have you ever thought about having micro weddings at Remick? Because the couples love rustic barns. So
Okay, so I've done one wedding here. It wasn't a micro wedding. She had about 100 people.
Oh.
One of the things, again, the challenge is we can't bring them inside if it's bad weather. So we don't have an indoor facility. I cannot control the animals. So if you're married outside and all of a sudden the goats and the cows want to come right up to the fence and talk while you're getting married, that's part of the experience. We are also, you know, the issue of alcohol on the property is a biggie.
We don't allow it.
Well, we don't either. And so as a result, people have been like, well, I don't want to get married there if you're not going to allow me let us drink.
Yeah, but for 2 hours, ceremony and photos, that's it. Yeah.
yeah, we can do that. And I've got a rental policy and different rates and things like that. So
All right.
I think the challenge right now is people are not sure if they can go outside or do things. We had a better September and October than we did in the summer. In fact, our September attendance was about 50% over September last year.
Great.
So,
Well,
yeah.
thank you both again. Any other questions for each other?
No. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and have a great rest of your conference. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.